You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Making Tracks Reaction Chat for Andor, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. My name's Mark, and with me is my main man in the Force. It's Mr. Mark Newbold, and we're going to be going through the third block of Season 2 of Andor, which is Episodes 7, 8 and 9, Messenger, Who Are You, and Welcome to Rebellion. All three episodes, I believe, were directed by James Semple, written by Dan Gilroy. So, we are now 2 years before Battle of Yavin. So, as we start this episode, let's talk Andor, a Star Wars story. Mark, what did you think of this episode? Let's break it down.
I've been seeing a lot of chatter online today, almost uniquely positive, and a heck of a lot of people saying, I think this is the best Star Wars thing I've ever seen. Certainly in terms of television. Episode 8, Who Are You, was just magnificent, but I've got to give huge kudos to the episode that precedes it and the episode that follows it, because they make this a proper chunky trilogy of just... I'm struggling to find the words, which is rare for me. It's Rick's Road good. It's Narkina 5 good. I think that's the best praise I can give it.
It's kind of Narkina 5 and Rick's Road all rolled into one. These first two episodes anyway, which really caps off at least what's going on down in Gorman, it's fantastic. We start off the episode and we start off a block, again with a 1 year time jump. We're on Yavin. It wasn't a surprise that we were going to get there, but I don't know, maybe it's my own expectation, but I just kind of wanted to discover Yavin a little bit. I mean, I know we saw it in the first arc and we see Andor fly away, which would suggest this is like a waypoint or a meeting point that Luthen knows about and is obviously using. But it kind of feels like we've gone from a small rebel cell and network to suddenly this exploded army. It kind of obviously feels a little bit overnight. And obviously I know it's been a whole year, but I think it's just the way that this show has been working is that almost a bit like with Star Wars Rebels, where we focus on another rebel cell, whilst we almost feel like Ethan is like the main axis point, also is kind of his own cell. It's orchestrating all these other ones, but we don't quite get the impression and the overall picture of what is going on in the galaxy.
One thing, it's made me want to go back and watch Rebels more than ever.
Totally, right?
Especially off the back of the 9th episode, but we'll get to that. Because you've got these gaps, these 1 year gaps, in one sense, it's something that we say a lot on Making Tracks. Lucasfilm now constructs stories with nice big holes in them so they can go in and fill in other ancillary material. It doesn't happen so much with Mandalorian. You know, that's definitely a Favreau Filoni thing. They've got that button down and tight, and that's theirs. That's not a toy to be shared with other people, only between themselves. But with an era like this, when you've got, as the title card says, literally a year between the last thing you saw last week and what you've seen this week, and then a block of however much time these 3 episodes encompass, and then another year to the next final block, is such rich storytelling ground for Lucasfilm to, we know this ties into Rebels, so they can drop animation in if they want. There's definitely options for live action, definitely, if they want to do it, and I hope they do. There's options for standalone movies. There's options for books and comics and all the other stuff that you want to do. So they've been very, very clever. To your point about Luthen, yes, it feels like the work that he's done, and he knew he was Moses never getting to the promised land. He said that in season 1 to Lonnie. So now this really feels like it's coming home, because even since last week, when we saw that 1 year before, 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, and now we're 2 years before, the work that he'd done, he was starting to lose control of it a little bit. He was getting away from him a little bit. And now it feels like other people are taking the reins from him to a degree. He's kind of being left in the dust. He feels like a bit of a problem, like Saw Gerrera felt like a problem in Rogue One, that he was seen as an outlier. And of course, we don't know where Luthen is at the point of Rogue One, but that's where that's sat. And so now you've got Willman coming in, turning up on Yavin, where Bix and Cassian are quite chilled out. Cassian's obviously been injured. his right shoulder's been hit. He's been hurt. So you presume that for a chunk of that year, he's probably been down and out of it. Not down and out, but down and out of it. Injured, healing and getting back to where he needs to be. I love that passage of time.
Do you make a good point? The passage of time does allow us to fill in the blanks later. And if you think about it, we're literally just looking at the initial pebble dropping into the lake. It's the first small ripples that are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes out into the further reaches of the galaxy. So on one level, yes, it makes perfect sense that, one, we will never see and know the full story of like what everything's happened across the galaxy, which is good because then, as you say, that's storytelling opportunities. And two, it kind of folds back into really how Luthen was operating. No one needs to know anything. He's got the burden. He's the one who knows everything. And as he was saying last week, he's struggling now with all these threads and all these plates spinning, that, he's struggling to keep all together, as it were. Is he being left behind, or is he kind of running out of steam a little bit? Or is it basically now the fact that this thing is kind of getting away from him?
Yeah.
You've got some big guns now in the Senate. So you've got Mon Mothma who's involved, and it's clear that Bail Organa's involved as well. And so like these other people that can take it on and take it to the next step, he's kind of like, I guess he can only take it so far. And then it needs to be handed over to like a General Drayden or something like that, somebody with more military experience or all military experience that will allow them to go, right, we're going to create a base. Now it's time that we need to start pulling all these other rebel cells together. And we did start to see that at the tail end of Rebels as well, didn't we? That, they were starting to coalesce and they end up in Yavin. So what was really nice about this was actually we see more than just the Yavin hangar, which is basically really all we saw really in Rogue One, and also, we saw even less than that in A New Hope. So to kind of see all these extra tents and these camps and stuff, and yeah, it looks like Bix and Cassian have been there for a while. They look quite comfortable. They're living in amongst nature. It's that juxtaposition to what we kind of see with the Empire, where they just kind of come in and just kind of destroy stuff. Their little hut kind of looks like they've gone glamping or something. There's trees kind of sprouting out of the middle of it. So it's something that would suggest, it's, they're trying to work in harmony with nature. But yeah, they seem like very kind of settled and set up there. So it'd be interesting to see what has happened in that year, because it feels almost like one of the most important year jumps that we've had to date. Wilman's back. I was kind of expecting him to rock up with some kind of like substance abuse, the way he was imbibing all those starfighter jet fuel last week. I don't think he's going to turn up and look like he's kind of an addict or something and be a bit of a liability, but he seems to have gotten his stuff together into meaning like weeks and months.
Yeah, exactly that. I thought, where will this go? Because he took a deep breath of it. The big scream last week, Saw's kind of making him understand his own motivations and such. Maybe that's just the way Saw is wired. Maybe huffing Rhydonium doesn't work for everybody, because Wilman looked more focused to me. And Wilman felt a little bit like that. Not that Wilman was ever not brave and loyal, but in this one, he seemed focused. He seemed, when Cassian kind of stepped up to him, and I'm thinking, wow, Cass, step back a bit, man, And Wilman just stands there and tells him what for. Luthen wants you back. Are you ready? That felt like a prevalent thing throughout the whole episode, because you got the sense that Cassian maybe wasn't ready, because the big thing is happening now is that the whole Gorman thing's moving forward. So the Empire are really pushing the fact the press are there, that there's been what they kind of define as like rebel attacks on Imperials. And you kind of start wondering, well, actually, how much of that is the Gorman front and how much of that is the Empire using the propaganda, the Ministry of Enlightenment and all that, just to elevate what's going on. That back on Yavin, Cassian is keen to get out of there, move on. As you mentioned, General Draven a moment ago. Great to see Draven, because I like Draven as a character.
Yeah.
But it was good little interaction between him and Cassian. You're right at the edge, Cassian, of us allowing you to just go off and do your own thing. The years passed, and all of a sudden, this is formalised from being rebels doing what they feel they need to do. It's interesting how it starts to build. Partagaz as well. We see him and Dedra talking. And Partagaz, actually, it's a moment of almost resignation. Krennic's been working for a whole year with his team to try and find an alternative to the Kalkites, and we can't find it. So bad luck, Gorman. What a line.
I kind of call BS on that. I don't necessarily think Krennic has. I think, for the way the Empire is and the way Krennic is, it'd be like, right, it's just a matter of time. We just kind of got to get people's opinion to a point whereby, we can set this thing alight, and then we can kind of start doing whatever we want and people will be justified. But the last block of 3 and this one, is the fact that you have to listen quite a bit. There's a lot of exposition that's going on in this, like you said, from news reporters and stuff. And it's a nice device, but also
like with the radio chatter in the background. And
exactly. All that kind of stuff is a way to kind of get that general feeling of like the galaxy over without having to go and cut to kind of
smash you over the head with it. Yeah,
cut to awkward extras, maybe having to say kind of lines and stuff like that, which always sound a bit hammy in that. So you can see that things are kind of starting to ramp up a bit, both on both sides. The government front has got a lot more together. They're still arguing the argument of semantics about do you do it peacefully or do you have to do it with violence, which seems to be kind of at the core of their essence, really.
That scene you're on about, there's a brilliant moment where the one guy basically says, we're still Gormans, we're still the Gore. If we lose that, what are we fighting for? And that felt like such a key, like a rebel ethos. Exactly. If we're not fighting for family, if we're not fighting for us, then what's the point?
Yeah, precisely. And that's the key thing, isn't it? It's about fighting it and, trying to exist and maintain your identity when you've got this imperial presence. So it's literally just waiting to just rip you off from the face of the planet.
I'm Derek Arnold, and I get my news from Fantha Tracks.
Coruscant. We see Mom, she returns. She has a very kind of sorrowful moment with the Gorman senator where he thanks her for her patience and her tenacity and her grace, I think is the phrase that she almost cracks when he says that. The thought that they, as senators, are so nervous to oppose the Emperor when the galaxy at large is tutting and saying, I wonder if the Emperor knows what's going on. That, to me, just threw right back to the opening page of the novel from 76. That sort of says, well, the Emperor was locked away and all this stuff was done in his name, almost making out like the Emperor was a puppet. And as a public-facing persona or a public-facing image, that actually works really well because we know, as the insightful people that know this story, like R2 knows this story, we know he's the puppet master. He's making all this happen. There's also a great moment when Partagaz and Dedra are talking where he makes it very clear to her, all the right people know what you've done. You stick to the course because you're about to ascend. He's very clear. He's making her know that all of her efforts haven't been done for nothing.
She's kind of losing her bottle a little bit. I think, for one, we know she knows what's going on, but she's not quite on board with the whole notion, which I think is actually quite good speaks kind of to her character to some extent, that actually there is a line. She's really struggling to step over that line.
Here's a question for you, though, Mark. There's a moment where Dedra and Cyril kiss. Well, actually, to be strict, Dedra kisses
Cyril.
And he looks a bit shocked because I think he's a personal space kind of guy, even with Dedra. I just wonder whether or not she would be quite so reticent, I would say. And even Partagaz, you look at his face, there's moments where even he's like, wow, are we really doing this? And it did seem like a moment of regret, but he said it way back in, I think, the first episode of season 2. Well, or actually the second episode. Well, I'm paraphrasing, we're on this train now. There's no getting off.
Exactly.
You are doing this. This is what we are doing. And failure is not an option. We know that's an Imperial thing. So I just wonder whether or not if she wasn't with Cyril, if that relationship hadn't have nurtured. And I love the fact that Imperial officers can have an apartment and can have a relationship and have a life outside of the military. I never really considered that to any great level. You think of it as rebels, we're not Imperials.
It's that slightly dehumanized view that we've always had about the Empire, even though they're all made up of humanoids. It seems like they all live just for their job. And actually, I think some of the newer canon has kind of opened that up a little bit more. And Andor's done it really well. Cyril's still undercover. He's still working the whole get the leverage and what have you and pass information back to Dedra. He's clearly, I think, started to kind of sympathize with them a little bit more. And you can see he's kind of more conflicted now than ever before. That was a really interesting direction to take him. I think partly it's just down to he's not necessarily confident. He's clear that he's starting to feel quite used by both Dedra and Partagaz. How much has Dedra always been using him? Or is it they're having a relationship, but it's handy that actually we can use him to get in with the Gorman front? I
think everybody's got their part to play and everyone's got their use to a point. Even the higher ups at some point come unstuck because clearly we don't, there's a lot of these characters in Andor we ain't seeing in Star Wars Empire and Jedi.
Well, exactly.
So, so their usefulness has a time limit on it. But there's a very interesting moment on Yavin, and this really throws forward to Rogue One for me, when Cassian has the interaction with Bix, with the Force healer, and she not only eases him physically with her skills, and he's not a convert in any measure, which again speaks to his whole stuff on Jeddah in Rogue One, but also what she says. She refers to him, it's the episode title, she refers to him as the messenger, which is so literal when you think of, when we're on Scarif and it's him and Jin getting the message up to the Rebel fleet to send the message about the Death Star plans. That really is something playing forward, but in its isolation, in that little small sequence when the healer's there just helping you see somebody with like a blast burn on her arm. She's drawn to Cassian, and Cassian's definitely a skeptic, and she must see that all the time. They could have overplayed that, but they just played it nicely. She wasn't too in your face. She wasn't too weirdly mystical, because that wouldn't really fit in Andor as a show. It's the nearest I think we've got to anything Force-related.
It's the most Force-related thing that we've had. The Andor Rogue One galaxy, for most Forceful users, as it were, is probably... pretty much, yeah. So therefore, you kind of go, right, well, if that's your Jedi level, and we're not going to get to that to Rogue One, I don't think you can have any interaction with like anybody beyond some kind of like latent Force user. Or
you see sort of a latent Force sensitivity with Finn that could be developed. When you look back in retrospect, Leia sensing Luke at the end of Empire, that's a similar thing. So these things are sort of seeded here and there. And this felt, okay, this Force healer has skills, no doubt that she has talents, and she has to keep it on the mega down low.
Exactly.
Because there's Inquisitors out there looking for people like her. So she can't be making a big song and dance about it. That was just nicely subtle. Cassian gets to Gorman, moves back into the hotel, meets the bellboy that he saw a year ago, clearly recognises him, gives him the room, even though he says that the place is sold out, does everything that you would hope he would do. Cassian stays in character, but there's just that little look, which I thought was really well played, because last week when Cassian was there in his Bono gear, he had the whole life story from the guy that his father died in the now called the Tarkin massacre. Cassian's in a room with a view, with his gun all nicely tucked away, starts looking through the sights. He can see the Imperial office in front of him, but he can also see a couple of stormtroopers stood above him as well. That's nicely set up for what we get to see in episode 8.
Although I have to say, I did like the whole hidden compartment attaché case, which is very kind of From Russia with Love, where you've kind of got the rifle in bits and stuff, and he has to put it all together. And also what I liked about that was that the rifle's built around his blaster, his dad's blaster, isn't it? So
Yes.
I've liked how he's kept that all the way through his journeys and stuff.
That's a nice touch as well, because it reminded me of Solo when Beckett gives Han his blaster and sort of pulls it apart from like a more of a sniper setup that he got.
Does the opposite.
So really interesting episode. Again, subtle. It moves at its own pace. I love Andor for the fact that it's not rushing. It will not rush for anyone. Impatient fans are going to moan that it's too slow. But if you're happy to watch it and you're ready for the payoff, every trilogy, if you like, every 3 episodes, you totally get the payoff for the patience of watching and absorbing and taking in what's being presented to you. So I thought this was another good one.
And when you think about it, at least the first 2 episodes of this block really is paying off the previous 3 episodes, because the whole thing of Gorman it's amazing when you think about it. This is literally that real spark that is really going to start to set that rebellion on fire.
Pose words, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. As a watch, because I think we all know there's meant to be this massacre. To have watched Andor without having had any connection to the internet for like the last 6 months or like a couple of years anyway. When we roll into the second episode and we start seeing like the barriers being pulled back, the Gorman front and everybody else start marching down around into basically what is a kill zone.
Totally.
And then you start watching it from a slightly morbid fascination of like, who's going to fire first? Yeah. What's going to be the thing that's going to set this whole place kicking off?
It's a tinderbox, like you say, and it's kind of set up in episode 7 of season 2, because you have those really clearly inexperienced Imperial soldiers being sent in. Even Dedra's like, they're just children, and even exactly. And even the sergeant's like, there's not a man among them. But the guy that's in charge, the captain that Partagas has had sent, are we going to have a problem? He knows exactly what's happening.
Yeah, he knows exactly what he needs to do. And you can tell he's evil because he's got a scar on his cheek. You're going to basically lean on the inexperienced kids to be A, the cannon fodder, but B, also the ones that will accidentally fire for no reason.
I mean, the press of the galaxy is there. Dedra mentions it in Who Are You, episode 8, that the armory is pretty much complete now. The shadow of the Empire is literally cast across that memorial square. Cassian's still there, sort of prepping and planning and biding his time very smartly. The Gorm are agitated, and as you say, they're just being boxed in. It's all ready to go. Cyril's told to report to the building. It's clear Dedra's keen for him to be safe. There's that sense that she wants to know. I mean, she said it in the previous episode, just pack your stuff, get ready to go. When I give the signal, get out of here. Good things are waiting for us. There is a pipeline, there is a pathway for a kind of a happy, as much of a happy ending as Cyril could hope for with Dedra. As we know, it doesn't go that way.
No, it doesn't. The rumours are really kind of ramping up. The Empire's starting to position in like land their mining gear, and that's conflicting and conflating, and that's just getting the whole population up. We're like, right, okay, let's organise a protest, which you can kind of understand if that's what you do. You know, you kind of do that, which would be a perfect use for Andor, so he can maybe kind of take a pop at Dedra whilst they're protesting. So you get that kind of march, and it kind of feels like something like straight out Les Mis, really. You've got the song, and then you've got the anthem. As a planet, this is probably one of the most well-rounded and thought-out, developed planet in the franchise. I don't think there's any other planet really that's got quite as much world building being invested on it.
In such a relatively short time, you know, there's worlds we've known of and been around for decades that don't feel as well-rounded as Gorman.
Yeah. It's remarkable. And I mean, funny enough, I was listening to Tony Gilroy on the Q&A podcast the other day. And actually, he was talking about the fact that they spent so much money on the Gorman sets, they had to develop the culture to justify it. And you can kind of see it. One leads into the other. The fact they've actually developed their own language.
It's beautifully rounded off. You hear them in the square. We are the Gorm, the galaxy is watching. They're very conscious, savvy, and very conscious that there are press there. You see it in episode 7. Just a few smatterings of press, but it's mostly local press. You get the sense they're talking about something happened in another town or another city or whatever. Now it's the whole galaxy have got their eyes on this.
I mean, I kind of feel like some of those reporters, he maybe got one that's maybe more Fox aligned, shall we say, so like slightly more pro-Empire. I feel like one of the other reporters maybe slightly more BBC, but slightly more neutral, but they're reporting it. Couple of kind of complaints that I've heard from people is that suddenly, the press has just come up overnight. But I think it's always been there. And if you remember, if you go back to the Senate, there's those camera droids floating around the Senate. And in my mind, I've always thought about, wouldn't it be cool to, like, during that fight between Emperor Palpatine and Yoda, you cut to outside and there's people just watching it on screens.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why the whole galaxy is so anti-Jedi, because they just see one taking on this poor old man who's just been beaten up by these wicked Jedi. On one hand, it feels very realistic, and on the other hand, it feels slightly alien to Star Wars to kind of like use the press in the way that they're doing. But I think it's the only way you can really get through the story and have the impact this like the Gorman Massacre is going to have, unless the story gets out.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Ryland's the father of the Gorman resistance. He sees that it's a trap. He knows the Imperials now are goading them just to make one wrong move to justify to attack. The daughter, though, is resolute. She believes the people want to be heard. They're angry and they're motivated. We've known that the Gorman Massacre is happening, so we know where this is going. Even Cyril, he's hearing rumours of the Drill's landing, so he's shocked. He feels like he's been played. So now you've got Cyril, who's always been so kind of organised.
Straight-edged.
Totally straight-edged, exactly. It's totally that. Now, all of a sudden, his hair's a bit of a mess. You know, he looks a little bit dishevelled. He's not quite the Cyril that we know. He's realising that, and he was always a small fry in the bigger picture, but nevertheless, the moment of realisation can't be much fun. So we see Dedra on the balcony looking at the square. You've also realised that the captain who's been brought in is now completely outranking her. He's dominating the scenario now, pretty much doing what Partagas said he would, but he's not listening to her at all. She's lost control of the situation. It's only going to go one way now, isn't it?
They're now just waiting for that moment to happen. And actually, it was interesting. I was kind of sat there thinking, I mean, it's quite telling in some respects. And obviously, I think maybe, again, an intentional thing by the ISB. But over this 3-year period, Dedra hasn't been promoted. She's still got the same 3 blue blocks on her uniform. She's the one who can control the situation until she can't, and then we bring somebody else in. But she can get it to a point whereby then we can get somebody else to take over and we can control her, keep her subdued. But the whole thing with violence is interesting because you go back to that meeting and he's the one who's like, we should kind of do this peacefully. We shouldn't take blasters. And so when he starts to call out Cyril and that, like everybody's kind of not really listening to him. They think he might be crying wolf a little bit. And then Cyril tells him, like, I'm here to pass on information. Tells him straight out.
Exactly. And it's a kind of a sad moment because the Gorm know they've been played. Cyril knows he's been played. Everyone's in their little box, if you like. Yeah. All filtering through to Dedra, who's not got control of it anymore. She's keen to know what's going on with Cyril. Cyril finally, after a while, gets to her, and she pretty much tells him everything, doesn't she?
Brutally, he chokes her, literally forcing the confession out of her.
It's full on.
I didn't think he had it in him to almost kind of stand up to her like that.
She, to her credit, I mean, she tells him about the Calcite. She says it's been planned for years. This is a fait accompli. And she doesn't try and stop him. I'm sure she could. I mean, she's trained, so I'm sure she kind of just lets him do it until he stops. He's in such shock when he steps back, the look in his face, and just walks away. And I think she wants to go after him, but Partagaz calls at that point.
That room is quite interesting. That little comms room is quite a sickly green. It's basically right. Nothing you can do now. This is happening.
I mean, Cyril gets in the crowd. Stones start to get thrown. You hear that song that is straight out of Les Mis. And then the first shot rings out.
What was genius from the Empire, you've got that sniper up at the top who's basically just there. He's like, I'll take you out, take you out, take you out. The Empire gets shot first. You kill a young know-nothing recruit and no one's really going to miss him. It's something that they talk about all the time. You speak to Cassian and Luthen about him. It's always about winning. It's not about freeing the galaxy. It's always we're going to win. So it kind of feels on one level like a game.
The correlation to Game of Thrones and things like that in Andor more than anything really stands up. We get to see the RX droids in action, which they're like Terminators. It was frightening to see how powerful they are. And you can totally see that they would, if they started kicking people around, it would look awful. The gunshots are going off. The RX droids have come in. A bomb blows up so people can get out of a wall. Cassian tries to get a shot off at Dedra, and then Cyril sees him. And then you've got, I've got to say, one of the best fist fights I've seen for years. An absolute knock him down, drag him out fight. I know Cassian's going to not get killed or anything. He really was in peril. And all of a sudden, it's Rylance, of all people, who's just been pushed over by Cyril. He's the one that basically blows Cyril's head off.
Yeah, headshot. Cyril spots Cassian, and bear in mind that the whole 2 seasons has basically been about Cyril tracking down Cassian on one level or another.
It's Inspector Javert. Yeah.
But then you've got Cassian on the floor, who's just about to get shot with his own rifle by being held by Cyril, and he's like, "Who are you?" So it's just like completely rubbing it in, like,
no idea.
Whilst you fixated about you, I don't even know who you are. You are just a nameless person that I don't recognize from Adam. Hats off to both of those guys, because it felt really brutal, but it's really justified. It shows the rage and the pent up aggression and that, and also is Cyril protecting his lady.
Cassian would have taken her out.
But I wasn't expecting Cyril to go down.
No.
I wasn't expecting to end this episode with him dead. There was a part of me in this episode kind of going, oh, is this where he turns and he joins forces with Andor?
That wouldn't have surprised me because I've cast this so well in the look of the actors, in the sense that you could have took any of those guys and stuck them in, superimposed, done a bit of ILM magic and stuck them in the briefing room at the end of A New Hope. And most of them wouldn't have looked out of place remotely. They would have looked like they fit. Cyril's one of them. They've cast it absolutely amazingly well in that sense. So, I wasn't expecting Cyril to go out. I mean, Dedra's watching. People are running everywhere. Willman's looking for Drina, the girl that he's kind of the driver from the previous 3 episodes. They've started something up there. The RX droids are coming in. And all of a sudden, you've got an RX droid that's really going for it for Cassian as they're trying to withdraw, who turns out to be quite a famous droid in the end.
I was kind of getting to a point in this season where I was like, where's K2? Didn't feel like there was a point whereby you could kind of get K2 kind of involved. And then it's like, okay. So he's going to get basically cut in half by the Imperial tank. But there's no other way, is it? Because, those guys were firing blaster bolts at the droid, and the droid was not going down. You see how many shots it took actually in Rogue One to finish him off. So they weren't going to have any chance of doing that anytime soon.
It's a crazy scene as they leave and Cassian says, take the droid. You can hear the Gore pleading for help, screaming, this is murder. So you just wonder how much of that is getting out into the galaxy. I would imagine at this point, the feeds have been cut because it doesn't serve the purpose anymore. Or maybe it's remotely looking down so you can't hear the people. But whichever way round, the Gormans have been completely screwed over. Dedra now, she's in shock. She's pretty much in tears. She pulls herself together. And we have a scene where we cut back to Coruscant and Edie's there with her friends. And whilst it's not overtly said, you definitely do get the sense that she knows that Cyril's
I think
not made it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's out, which is, I think you see a couple of times, certainly where she's kind of sat at the breakfast table, Matt, with the spider and stuff. In the end, she is a mother, have to mourn the loss of her son.
Given the breakdown we've just done of the episode and the action of the episode, I think the most overwhelming and important aspect of this 8th episode of season 2 is how it made you feel. So characters have died that we've been following since episode 1, really, of season 1. It's a huge pivotal moment for the Empire, certainly for the Rebellion, and more importantly for the Gormans, a name that we've been hearing about since the early 90s. What did this episode do for you?
I had to take a deep breath afterwards. I was like, I watched it in the colour suite. I was clapping as the credits rolled. Everything has been leading to this point for weeks and weeks and weeks. We talked about the Gorman massacre and that, and so like to get it and also know that we still got another 4 episodes after this kind of makes you go, where are they going to go next? What's going to happen next? And then you start to count on your fingers who's left and who needs to survive.
I think for me, watching this one, sometimes when you watch something, you get a little bit of a, not the shakes, but just you kind of...
It's your adrenaline.
That's how it got me for this one. Rick's Road's my favourite Star Wars episode of anything. I just think it's magnificent. And this was very different to Rick's Road, because the thing that works for me on Rick's Road is Marva's speech, fueling them to that moment where they feel like they can fight back, and they do. With this, because you could see over the course of a few episodes that we've built and built and built, and we've seen the devastation, what's going to happen to them now. I mean, the people are being massacred, but that's not 800,000 people on the planet. I think they said at the Maltine Divide on Gorman. So you would think that's an achievable amount of people to relocate. A couple of 3-star destroyers would get everybody off planet. But then that's Gorman gone. And now we know the drills are in. They're basically saying, the planet's screwed, let's just drill the hell out of it. So the Empire doesn't care. So Gorman's fate is pretty much sealed. You just got to wonder what's going to happen to the people. But as a piece of television, I think Star Wars is going to have to go a heck of a long way to match this.
We've had such inconsistent Star Wars storytelling, and tonally speaking, this series is going to stand out as quite a stark contrast to everything else. How much more of this level of storytelling I think I could tolerate watching, I guess, year on year is quite hard to know.
Hi, this is Julie Dolan, the voice of Princess Leia, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. It's your only hope.
So this episode really is dealing with the fallout. It's bringing us almost up to date with what we see in Rebels. This is kind of catching up with Mon Mothma. And actually, one thing that I noticed it last week as well, but it's nice how every year Mon just looks a little bit more stressed. We saw Genevieve O'Reilly a couple of weeks ago, and that's definitely makeup because she looked absolutely flawless. I like that. I like how they've just done that just to kind of add on the extra weight of like impending doom onto her shoulders in that way.
Yeah, one of the things when we did the press junket, one of the questions was, you start off in the first block of season 2 and your clothing, it's the wedding. So your clothing's immaculate. It's like bling to the max. And then as each block goes down, we're getting closer and closer to the Rogue One Mon Mothma, which of course is pretty close to the Return of the Jedi Mon Mothma. So it's towards that more familiar look. And that was, as you say, very evident in this. We're on Coruscant. We've seen the Gorman senator be arrested, which is just awful. Bale is basically saying, I need to stay, but Mon, you need to go. Yavin's not ready, but you need to go. She's determined to speak out. She wants to make this speech. Yeah. The speech that was referred to, as you say, in Rebels, it's a moment that we've kind of known about for a while. And now we're seeing the nitty-gritty of how it was done, but also how she gets off planet.
Yes, I thought this whole episode was nicely weighted. It had some really nice pace into this episode. It's the talk that, basically puts crosshairs on her, well and truly. And we kind of see stuff like how the ISB has been listening to a lot of the senators, and actively, not just passively, but actively listening to them. They have control of the Senate feeds and stuff. So what people get to see or don't see from the Senate, so they're manipulating the press, manipulating the output of the Senate itself. It's a authoritarian government who controls everything, the press especially, because ultimately you control the press, you control the narrative. And that's what we end up having in this episode. We have senators who are speaking out for their one person who died on Gorman, irrespective of the fact that we hear that there's thousands of Gore dead.
We see Claire, she gives Cassian his mission. He's got to go into the Senate posing as a journalist, which is great because we know Cassian can do these undercover things. He's been well trained by Luthen. Mon finds a bug in her office. As soon as she smashes it, the Imperials realise that she's found the bug. Yeah. So she needs to practice her speech. She goes to the plaza. She's out there on her own, and that's when Luthen finds her. He says Bale's team has been compromised. And so she's obviously thinking about Tay Colmer and what happened to him. Luthen says he'll send somebody who will say the phrase, I have friends everywhere. I love that. The fact that Luthen, we haven't seen much of Luthen in the last few episodes. No. And then here he appears just at the point when you actually need him the most. She will be able to do the thing she wants to do the most, which is make the speech, but then also do something else, which is rather important, not die. So he's going to facilitate her escape from the Senate.
I don't think she trusts Luthen.
No.
Not anymore. But I think it's a means to an end now. She needs to get off planet.
Luthen's coming to the end of his usefulness in the broader picture of the rebellion now.
Yeah, and I think he kind of knows it as well a little bit. He has resigned himself to the fact that he's not going to see the end of this empire. And now it almost feels like, he kind of doesn't really even want to maybe think about going to Yavin.
Yeah.
It's kind of like...
What would he do anyway? I mean, he's not going to be a higher up. They don't trust him.
No, well, that's just it, isn't it? It's kind of like, where would he be placed? What would he do, Matt? It's ironically, he's been his own puppet master. He's been like the anti-Emperor Palpatine on some levels, controlling the rebels.
Really interesting way of looking at it. It really is. Cassian enters the Senate, acting as a journalist. They're perfecting their plan to pull Mon out. Mon and Bail are talking. Bail says, you need to leave as soon as your speech is done. They say their goodbyes. It's great to see the Senate. It's always good to see the Senate. And we really do see it at full strength here. Very pro-imperial, very anti-Gorman. The propaganda you've mentioned and that the Ministry of Enlightenment have been putting out there is really shown to its full effect here, because the anti-Gorman sentiment it's the prevalent thing, isn't it?
Just about most senators are pro-imperial, to the point whereby they call an early Senate so that it doesn't give people kind of like any chance to change the agenda. So Bail has to pull this kind of fast one and enact like protocols at 7152 or something -2, that one, to kind of yield the floor to another senior senator, and that, which was a nice stroke of genius from kind of almost puts like a crosshairs on his back as well. Anybody who's going to be seen to aid anybody who's pro-Gore is now going to be well and truly tarred with the rebel brush, even if you're kind of not.
Absolutely. And he yields the floor to Mon, who finally does get up there to do her speech. And I mean, the intervening time, Bail's team, Luthen was right. One of Bail's team was a bad apple. And so that gets revealed. She kills one of the three other officers. And so there's the issue starting there. Bail's stalling. He gets Mon up. Mon gives her speech as Cassian's moving through the halls. We can see things happening in real time, essentially. Going from that incredible room of the Senate to the halls behind, was like getting lost at the back of the Albert Hall. The Imperials are trying to cut the feed, but they can't get access to the room where the feed gets cut. That whole sequence was beautiful because they were pulling their hair out.
I love it because it was like, oh yeah, we've been able to get access all the time. Yeah, but we fixed it. Was that something, again, that's Luthen's kind of like orchestrated, or is that just the irony of big government?
I think it's a bit of both, exactly that. I think it's totally a bit of both. She's out there, she's calling it genocide. She calls out Palpatine by name. The broadcast is finally shut down and she makes her escape. When Cassian turns up and starts getting her out, just the whole tone of it, the fact that she knows she has to flee and she has to just give herself, in a sense, to Cassian to protect her.
She's kind of being dragged. You could say she's wavering. She's like, oh yeah, Cassian needs to be the strong one to get her through, man. He gives her his jacket, takes off her blue cloak, and then she's now borrowing the jacket. Like, underneath that cream stuff is what you see her in Rebels. I'm glad they kind of got that lined up. Otherwise, somebody would complain somewhere.
Oh, no. I mean, it's clear that they want these things all to blend
totally
in nicely.
Yeah.
But that was a great spot. It really, really does. Erskine, her aide, who she's had a bit of a falling out, he says he'll cover them as the stormtroopers are moving in. So he makes his move. We also see her driver, who we know and she knows is ISB. He gets taken out. Cassian takes him down as well. Doesn't even think about it. Just does it. And now people are fleeing from the Senate building. So there's mass confusion. It's brilliantly orchestrated. The whole sequence is fantastically done.
Just that location for the Senate, all that exterior stuff just looks fantastic. And you kind of get this real sense of scope, very kind of pristine and clean all around that Senate plaza. They've got an escape route. Cassian's meant to be taking her down. I think it's down to loading bay or something. And she's like, no, we can't go that way. And kind of doesn't necessarily take control, but at least knows her way around the building. So using her experience and that to get out and get away in the, I don't know, what's it, the Space Lincoln or something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And when we get to the sequence where everyone's out, I mean, Bail's on his own pretty much in the Senate. Mon and Cassian are blasting away in the speeder. We cut to Yavin, we see a weapons inspection, and we see Melchi. We see Mon and Cassian and Wilman, who's in a bit of a bad way, in the apartments on Coruscant. Luthen has made it out. Luthen's safe. Bix and Cassian are reunited. This was what really stood out to me. Cassian is like, I'm done. I want out. I just want to be with you. I don't want to do this anymore. And Bix is very quiet. Bix doesn't say a lot. And when Cassian wakes, Bix has left and she leaves the message and basically says, when this is all done, come and find me. So even though he's literally willing to leave it all behind. I've done enough. I just want to find somewhere quiet and be with you. She's like, no, this is your destiny. All I could think from that was what the Force healer had said. Had really took a note with Bix. And I think that worried Cassian because they've known each other their whole lives. So Cassian knows that Bix would be into this kind of... It's not people being into reading your tea leaves or whatever.
Tarot cards and stuff.
Tarot cards. It's that kind of thing. So I think that's why Cassian was worried more than learning what he would learn. I think he was worried that Bix would take its heart. Bix really did take its heart.
But also it's that conversation that Bix had with Vel, I think, as well. Do you think she's gone off, as it were, with Vel on some kind of rebel mission or something?
It's quite possible. I mean, we know Bix is mega capable, but I think it's kind of been shown that certainly early on, she was very much an idealist in season 1, and she was the connection to Luthen. What made Luthen connect to Bix? We know Luthen's a bit like one of the Game of Thrones characters that we were sort of making the images to with the little birds, you know, Varys, I think it was, who just had little connections everywhere. There's a connection there in a tonal sense that Bix was one of these little birds. And almost by luck, it's Cassian that gets brought in as a result of that. And Cassian becomes the focus because he can totally see that this guy's fueled up, ready to go, and has all the skills. And he actually, even though he's annoyed with Luthen for most of the show, he does listen and he does absorb it and take it in. We do finish the episode once we learn that Bix is gone with K2SO waking up. And he is definitely K2SO. The Tudyk voice is there, the humour's there. And we're good to go for the next batch of episodes.
I think this is the end of this week's episode of Reaction Chat. And we will be back very, very soon for the final instalment, Block 4 of Andor Star Story.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And until then, stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Collecting Tracks.